Hi guys, it's Matt here from Maxon UK, and in this R19 feature video we are looking at the new GPU renderer called ProRender in Cinema 4D. Now, as you can see from some of these examples, it is an incredibly powerful physically based renderer. So it is designed to give you the most realistic looking things that you can possibly create at the moment. It's absolutely wonderful. Now, it's one of my favourite features. It isn't, how should we say, quite production ready yet, and there are a variety of different things that it doesn't yet work with. You can find all of those in the manual and in the help file, but I want you to show you that what it does do incredibly well. And you can see some other examples on the maxon.net website of some of the incredible things that you can create with it. But in this video, I'm just going to give a quick run through some of the ways that you can get yourself up and running really fast. So the first thing you need to do is go up to your render settings, and you need to change it from the standard to ProRender. If you don't have this option, you need to check which version of Cinema 4D R19 you will have. I know that this version is definitely not available in Prime, and I know it's available in Studio, so just have a quick check of which version you've got if your renderer isn't there. So you go to ProRender and you can see that it gets rid of a whole load of options here, because basically you have your ProRender. You've got your two versions here, which is the offline, which is the standard renderer when you render to picture viewer, and you have your preview, which you are able to activate in your viewport here. And you've got two settings for the two, so that you can choose what your final output will be like, but what your preview will be like as well. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to set myself like a sphere here, and that's what we are going to use to start with. So to use ProRender, go into your viewport. If you want to use this to sort of render quickly in your viewport, click Use ProRender and then click Start ProRender, and it will process for a second, and there we go. It starts to create our sphere. But what I like about this is that it's so quick in reworking its renderer. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make a sky. It doesn't work with physical sky at the moment, so just create a normal sky, and it creates this mapped background here for you, and this wonderful HDRI. And you can just move around this sphere, and you can see that it ever so quickly works out with the lighting, and it starts to process and utilize the light sources, utilize ProRender settings to give you a nice realistic looking effect. Now, there are a few other things you need to be aware of. ProRender works particularly well and only really with the new PBR materials. So if you've got a scene that you want to texture and want to throw into ProRender, you are definitely going to need to strip out the materials and restart with these PBR materials, because they are the ones that work best with the ProRender. So create yourself a ProRender material and then just drag and drop it onto your object, and you can see it starts to resolve. Now, the ProRender materials use a variety of channels, and you can see that some are greyed out. Now, my recommendation is that you use the reflectance channel and its diffuse option for colour and images and things like that, and then the reflection is, as you'd expect, the sort of specular and the outer sort of shell of shininess, which at the moment is set to 30% roughness. So if I just lower that down to something like 2%, we're going to start to get ourselves a nice shiny wall. And then using the default diffuse, you can change its color, you know, really quickly to something like red, and you can see that that changes in no time whatsoever. So if I'm just going to use that actually, so you can see that you can scrub through and its color change is almost instantaneous. It does look a bit grainy, yes, but that's because of the number of what we call iterations that this preview mode is currently doing. If you were to do a full render, you'd notice that it does start to work its way out. So if I bring up the render settings actually, and I'm just going to quickly dock them over here so that I don't have to keep loading it. There we go. And if I look at my ray depth here, that's something that you can increase, and you'll find that it does start to work its way out. That's how far light will travel through things. but it's the number of iterations here. Also your anti-aliasing sample, if I would just up that to 1, we don't want to go too nuts, otherwise we'll be sitting here for hours watching it render. But maybe 200 iterations. You can see that's the number of times it reworks that image till it gets better and better. Okay, so you can see just how fast this is at, you know, producing a scene and giving you some nice lighting, you know, that's realistic with, you know, the background HDRI available to you, and you just can swap that HDRI out for a standard one if you've got a whole load of ones that you like, and it will reflect and work accordingly. Now, one thing ProRender is going to be very good at the moment is product visualization, and I'm just going to, you know, quickly show you how I would set up some sort of product scene. So depending on the size of your product, you are going to need to utilize your space. So, you know, if you're going to do you know, a car automotive stuff, or if you've got products, you know, what you want to do is make sure that they are to scale, because ProRender works best when things are to the correct scale because of the way light bounces and so on and so forth. So, for example, if I was to just search for a car, you know, really quickly, and just, you know, drag and drop one of the basic ones in there, its materials won't be set up, you know, in quite the way that I would need them to at this point, but it just gives me a sense of scale. I would use the pen tool. Okay, and I would create ourselves a nice little bowl shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to eventually create a lathe NURBS, but what this does is it gives me a nice seamless background. It's another different way of creating what I've done previously in the past, but you know, there's a variety of different ways of doing all sorts of stuff in 3D. So, and then just create yourselves a lathe NURBS and drag and drop. Make sure that your central point is at 0, otherwise you'll get this weird starring effect. So just make sure that that's at 0, and then that smooths its way out. Perfect. So you get our car sitting in the middle, and then I just want to sort of give you a quick idea of how ProRender, you know, really works. So once again, just changing my settings to ProRender, and then use, and then start, and then give it a second to compile its shaders. What compiling shaders means is that it can utilize some of the textures that Cinema 4D has natively, but it can't use them without baking it out. So when it says compiling, what it's doing is it's sending out a texture to compile and bake out textures so that it can use them. You can see that how fast that was, and it uses a standard light and a standard HDRI map as a kind of reflective background. If you create your sky, we'll end up with our different background again. And the other thing that's useful in Cinema 4D with the ProRender, which is new as well, is to use our our PBR lights. So these are really good for our PBR stuff. So once you create a PBR light, you can move it around, and you know, you can see how fast it actually updates within our editor. And you can move it up, you can move it down, you know, you can control the angles and things like that. Now it works in a physically based sort of system, so depending on how big your light is will depend on how much light it emits. So the more light there is, the brighter your scene will be. As you can see, it is updated in these settings, and this is, you know, a really nice physically based light source. Equally, the further away the light source is, the dimmer it will be from what we are seeing. Now you can't adjust its sort of shadows because that should all be, you know, physically and standard based. You can see how much we're, you know, getting these iterations. It starts to work its way out and becomes something that does look relatively nice. Now, earlier you heard me talk about ray depth, and at the moment the ray depth is hitting these windows and stopping and acting like a reflection, and we can't actually see inside. So you may need to increase your ray depth a little bit until your car starts to respond, your light starts to respond. There we go, we can start to see the internal structure of this a little bit more. We can start to see those seats on the inside. But this is how fast it is to set up a decent scene in ProRender and start to be able to look around. It's not handling these materials too badly, and if I was to leave this on to render for a little period of time using the full render settings, it might do a quite nice job. But I've found from having played with it over the last few weeks that if you want a really nice ProRender look, then you need to use the ProRender materials. You can see it's still sort of continuing to resolve here, and it's working its way through each of the individual iterations. So while it's busy doing that, I'll just have a quick sort of talk to you through what they are. So the ray depth, as you've discovered, allows how far light will pass through objects. Anti-aliasing samples is how many samples it will use to anti-alias and to soften the outlines of a variety of different things, so like the pixels and the lights and so on and so forth. Your blurring is the way that will work to soften your image. Radiance clamp means that it will try and work out where there might be problem areas where you can see that there are sometimes pixels that are too light that shouldn't be, and it will have a clamp on that so that there is no more of a sort of 10-degree spike between that. Firefly threshold is a useful thing as well. Sometimes you get these little fireflies, these little white dots, and what it does is it tries to work its way and stop that sort of stuff from happening, and it will sort of compare it around everywhere and see what color pixels are around, and then try and get rid of anything that it feels should not be there. You've got different ways that you can let stuff render down here, and this stop condition is what they call an iteration count. So what it will do 100 iterations of the different versions, trying to resolve this image, and then it will stop, which for our preview is okay, but for offline you're going to want way more than that. And those images that you saw at the beginning were somewhere in the realm of 1,000 to 2,500 iterations and took about 4 hours to render. So as you can see, it's not quite ready for using in animations, but certainly for still image stuff it is absolutely wonderful. So I hope you enjoy using ProRender and play around with its materials. I'll probably do some more tutorials on it another point, but certainly just using ProRender in your preview gives you a wonderful and incredibly fast sense of just how quickly you can set up a scene, and you can see how light is going to affect it, how shadows are going to affect it, and without the need for the interactive render region or the or to keep doing preview renders. And I'm not speeding this up at all. This is exactly how it comes. So whilst we've got a massive light there, if I hide it, it's still visible because it's rendering. If you ever need to get rid of an object, you need to hide it from the renderer, and then it will disappear, but it will of course then stop having its lighting effect for you. Another thing I really like about ProRender is the fact that you can add in depth of field. So over in your preview range, if I just add in depth of field and I just take myself in a little bit closer, create myself a camera and look through it. Now under the physical settings of the camera, you may need to adjust your f-stop a little bit. So maybe to something smaller, at 8, let's just put it on 2. And then you should be able to choose like a focus object, and you should start to see that things start to blur out as it starts to resolve its image. So if you want a particular area in focus, just have your camera look at your object, and then maybe pick an object, or as I've done sort of before, I create a null object which I find works really well, and then I use that as the camera focus. So if I pick up that null, you adjust it to the position where you're going to want it, and it should start to resolve itself. So I'm just going to adjust my view just so I can, let's just choose the back end. So let's try and see if we can really get a depth of field look working here. and maybe just increase the height of where that was as well. So just, you know, after a few adjustments, we've got ProRender, you know, working here. And you can see that it's nice and clean and crisp. Whilst the image is still resolving itself, it is blurring here, you know, to give us a nice sense of depth of field. Maybe just to highlight that even further, what I might is just really decrease that f-stop so that we can let it resolve. There you go, you can see just how blurry that is now there as an outline, and you know how nice and shiny it is over here. It's giving us some nice detail, so you know, working off the metallic paint quite nicely. Well, I hope that was a useful video for you, showing you what ProRender is capable of. Only more to come on that front over the next few versions of Cinema 4D. I don't think I can wait. So I am Matt from Max on UK, and I will catch you next time.